Hi, my name is Gloria Swanson, and as part of this testimonial, I have some firsthand knowledge in connection with the HistoryMakers. In the early days of some of their early interviews, I had the honor of being the transcriber. And as a result of that, I got to hear and view some of the interviews, maybe 200 or 300 of them, firsthand. Interviews that lasted 2 hours or 4 hours or 10 hours. And as a result of all of this information, I feel like I should have a degree in African American history. The interviews were informative, some of them sad at points where you could relate to what the history maker was talking about, and some of them were hilarious. I would be transcribing with my headphones on, and in my little home office, I have my office in the lower level of my home, and my husband would hear me cracking up downstairs, and he'd say, "I heard you down there." So, I feel honored to have been part of this, and unlike when I went to school where we heard about George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington, our children, grandchildren, and even us are able to hear about African Americans who've made big achievements and maybe no one knew about them, or even the ones we heard about. So I'm happy to be part of this. African American people are formative throughout the struggles. They've been resilient, not only physically enduring life and struggles, but also mentally tenacious. And I commend Juliana Richardson and the HistoryMakers for making this part of our history, our children's history, and making an archive for the world long after us to be able to view and connect with.
Speed. Go ahead.
All right, my name's Hal Gordon, and as an intern at the HistoryMakers in the summer of 2007, I was able to see the inner workings of this project and directly affect some of the production, and it has really shown me the vast diversity of the African American story throughout history. Being able to see not only just stories from the civil rights movement, but people who seem to have led normal lives every day and found success. Anyway.
It's okay, these will be edited. If you want to restate it, go ahead. Start over. Fine.
Yeah, I might want to start over. That was pretty bad. Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah,
We'll keep that.
You were doing well.
All right. As an intern, I was able to watch over a dozen of these interviews, and to be able to just see a life story in 3 hours seems to me, as a student at the University of Chicago, an invaluable piece of primary history that could be lost and it is impossible to transfer through textbooks or scholarly journals or any way else, newspaper articles. The insight that our interviewers are able to bring out in these historically important lives will be a testament and an asset to future scholars and to generations in the future who will be able to find pride not only in African American history but American history, as I think they're one and the same. All right.
Okay. Hold on. Okay, yes. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Emily Rowe, R-O-W-E, and I've been a research and writing intern for the HistoryMakers. The main part of my job has been doing outlines and preparing background research for the interviewers to take into the interviews with them, so they know a chronology of the people's lives and they can ask sort of well-informed questions. And I've been especially working on the New York interviews, and there's been a lot of very cool people coming out of there. I've had a lot of makeup and fashion artists, so while I didn't know a ton about that coming in, I'm starting to recognize a lot of the same names, and generally they have really cool stories, I find, and they're, they've met all these celebrities and things like that, and I get to look at pictures of their designs. Obviously a lot of arts people in New York. The one I've been doing lately, actually, that's made me really, really happy all the time is Kevin Clash, who is the puppeteer behind Elmo. And I think it's just reconnecting with my 90s childhood because he did all these characters that I loved. So I was telling people about it the other night, and all my friends get really excited too because he was Splinter in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. He was Baby on the Dinosaurs, which I remember and hadn't thought about in years, and just Elmo in general. So that's been very exciting. There's also been things where it's just, you look at someone and you're like, wow, this is really cool from a historical standpoint. I've had a lot, especially the civil rights people always strike me that way, where I just look at it and like, your story has got to be really neat because you were here and then you were doing this and you met someone here and they were just at all these historically significant moments. Another facet of my job has been watching some of the interviews and evaluations, so I've had some really cool people there as well. The one that I always like to tell people about is watching a woman who's a school teacher from North Carolina. And she had a neat story, and she was talking about integration and having this firsthand experience of what integration was like in the schools as a teacher coming in, right in the 1950s. And then at the same time, she had other stories, so that, she's talking about going to grad school in Boston, and she says, oh, I met Martin Luther King. And the interviewer obviously gets interested, and I was like, really, you met him? And she said, yeah, I actually dated him for a little while. And then she goes off and talks about the 6 months where she dated Martin Luther King. And, you have all this detail about what he was thinking in grad school, what he was like, what his friends thought of him, and that was really neat. The other one, if I can remember it, I had another good example. The one that I used the other day.
Do you want to post for a moment?
Sure.
And speed.
Okay. In general, I guess I see a value for oral history now in those sort of more individual stories, in the people that don't necessarily write a book all the time or, may not be in the news. The people that a lot of times when we're doing research on them, we have to call them, we have to say, can you send me a resume because there's nothing about this person out there. And then you start talking to them and you start learning things about them, and they've seen all these things and met all these people, and they have such a wealth of knowledge that wouldn't be getting preserved any other way. I'm done.
And speed.
Okay, my name is Maya Millett, M-A-Y-A-M-I-L-L-E-T-T. I've been interning with the HistoryMakers for about 4 months now, so I've really, over the course of my 4 months experience, learned a lot about African American history that I was not able to learn in my classes. Being an African and Black Diaspora Studies minor at DePaul, you learn a lot, textbook-wise, you learn a lot through literature, but it's one thing to learn about those things via the written word, and another to be able to talk to people on the phone or watch an interview where they are reiterating their stories and have it be placed into history, and you're watching these firsthand accounts, or you're listening to these people talk to you, and it's amazing to make that connection, because it's kind of a missing link that you can't learn in a school setting. So that's been really valuable to me. And especially once I started evaluating interviews, when I could see how my research has been able to play out into an interview setting. Specifically, I did the research for all of the Phoenix area that we did, and first of all, I had no idea how much of a huge civil rights impact the Phoenix area, or just how much of a huge, okay, wait, what am I trying to say? How big the civil rights was in Phoenix during the 1960s, because usually you associate civil rights movements with the South or with Washington, D.C., but Phoenix, Arizona is not something, not an area where you automatically trigger in your mind when you think civil rights. And because I was researching about 9 people, you really, after a certain period of time, get to know these people. You know their lives, and you see what they've done, and you feel like you know their stories. And then also just talking with people on the phone about their stories is really impactful, because towards the end, you feel like they've shared a little bit of themselves with you, and you feel privileged to have been exposed to this knowledge. Just the other week, I called James McQuay, who is a furrier in New York, and I talked to him on the phone because there wasn't a lot of information on the internet, and I knew that if I just had him fill out the questionnaire, there still wouldn't be enough information there for the interviewer to conduct a good interview. So I thought that I would just kind of mimic the questions that I heard in the evaluations that I did, and conduct an interview myself to get the information. And we ended up talking for an hour about his life, and towards the end he said that he was so happy that we could talk, and how much he appreciated that I took the time to call him and ask him all these questions, and how a lot of the things that we talked about were things that he hadn't thought about in years. And one of the things that Juliana talks about with the HistoryMakers is that the purpose of the project is to reawaken memories, and that's exactly what I did with him. And it makes you feel really good to know that you're taking part of this reawakened memory process, and really being able to unearth these memories so that you can give it to a wider audience in the end, and make more people knowledgeable of others' stories and their contribution to history, and important things that they've done for us. I don't know how to end that, but it's kind of what it is.
Could you try to restate that last sentence, please?
It's important to, let me think. I don't know.
Want me to pause?
Yeah.
Speak.
So Juliana always talks about, the purpose of the project of the HistoryMakers is to reawaken memories, and I feel like that's exactly what I did with James McQuay, because when the interview, the kind of informal interview that we had wrapped, he said that he was so appreciative of our conversation because it really made him think about things that he hadn't thought about in years. And I remember feeling really good to know that I was able to do that for him, because in effect, me being able to reawaken his memories it's going to benefit other people in the future who are able to benefit from the stories that he's shared. And that's really what the HistoryMakers is doing. Is that good?
Okay, speak.
Alicia Maule, Alicia, Cepeda, Cepeda, Maule, Maule.
Okay, go ahead and start.
Okay, well, what the HistoryMakers has meant to me working for the HistoryMakers means more to me than I ever thought it would. I volunteered a few times during the school year to complete some community service time.
And it was fun, but it wasn't. It was too quick to appreciate anything. And then I interned here, and it completely sort of had a huge impact on me. Partly because it was my first year taking African American history as a concentration, not just as a section of world history or American U.S. history. So it was my senior year, was my first time just taking African American history as a course, and so to follow it up, working for the HistoryMakers really complemented one another. And also as I'm Colombian and African American, and I lost my father when I was 6, so I was never able to sort of experience sort of the Black experience like maybe a typical African American child would, because I didn't have my father there to teach me everything that he went through, and the importance of Omega Psi Phi, what it means to be a minority at Harvard, what it means to be a minority in law. Did have my mom's Colombian attitude as well. So I took it upon myself to learn about African American history, read the books of Richard Wright, and all the different all the famous novels written by famous African Americans, and so that I really got that all together, like the culmination of my senior year, and it's what I talked about in my college essay. So coming here and actually hearing individual stories of professionals firsthand also made a huge difference in how I thought of myself in the sort of whole scheme of things, if that makes any sense. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
If you want to pause, we can.
Okay, sorry.
And speak.
I had a few HistoryMaker moments, particularly when I was doing the evaluations. I had the chance to look at between 5 and 6 interviews that were conducted in the past year. One of them was Joyce Brown, who's the president, the first African American person, the first woman, female president of the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York. And I did her outline, and I also evaluated her interview, and I was actually in New York, and I went by this big ugly building and it said FIT, and I knew exactly who the president was, and I was able to tell my friends, and so that's an exciting moment that I had. And another one was when I interviewed an education maker, or I evaluated an education maker who actually grew up in Biloxi, Mississippi, which was one of the hardest hit locations, one of the hardest hit places by Katrina. And I actually went to help out in the efforts my junior year of high school. And so to make that connection was really like, I was excited all day, and I felt, it's a small world, but it was just a great feeling to have that happen. Okay, train of thought is gone. Moment.
Speak. Go.
It was a very touching moment.
Just kind of like rephrase what you just said, but just end it. So like maybe just like sum up the last 5 sentences of what you said before.
When I evaluated an education maker who actually grew up in Biloxi, Mississippi, it was.
Well, remember you talked about your high school experience.
Right. When I evaluated the interview of an education maker from the South, she had grown up in Biloxi, Mississippi, which was one of the hardest hit places in the South by Hurricane Katrina. And so when she was talking about her neighborhood and where she grew up, I instantly was touched because I worked there. I helped out for a week with my high school, my junior year of high school, in the Katrina relief aftermath. So that was a very touching moment, and I felt very connected to the project.
Okay. That's speak.
Well, Juliana Richardson has always been a good friend of my family, so I always thought of her as a friend and not so much as a professional in this amazing project. So actually working for her, I stepped in the office with my eyes lit up. I never understood the magnitude of the project and the long-term effects it's going to have hopefully on the entire country, if not the world. So working here really makes a difference in seeing how much work is being put into this project, and yeah.
Okay, just tighten up that last
Yeah.
sentence.
Yeah, like don't
That was a good wrap up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready.
Just start again.
Sure.
Okay, so Julie Richardson has always been a good friend of my family since I was a little girl, but I never understood really the magnitude of this project and the impact it will have, and it already has had on the African American community and the American community as a whole. So working here, I really realized how serious it is, and the amount of time she puts in, and everyone that works here. It's like obviously it's a full-time job, weekends, after hours, and it really is going to take a collective force to help this progress to where she wants it to be. So I realized the importance of volunteers and the importance of working for a nonprofit. So it has really been a pleasure to work inside of the HistoryMakers and see what goes on behind the videos and behind the An Evening With programs. So it's been really great.